Hola, somos Angélica, Graciel, Paula y Paulina y te queremos dar la bienvenida. Nosotras compartimos la misma pasión por echar chismecito y contar nuestras historias migratorias y de vida. En este espacio auténtico, respetuoso, acogedor y de mucha amistad, te abrimos nuestros corazones y esperamos que encuentres ecos de tu propia historia en la nuestra. Así que lánzate por tu bebida favorita, porque ya es cafecito time.
Y buenos días, buenas noches a todos los que nos estén escuchando. Ya por este lado del charco ya es desde día y yo sé que Paulina ya pronto va a disfrutar de estas bellas mañanas tempranas. Ya sé que ya te vas a venir y eso me da mucha felicidad. Yo creo que ya nos podemos juntar pronto tú y yo.
Sí,
Nos quedamos
definitivamente.
más cerca, ¿verdad? Pero algo que me da mucha más felicidad es que por fin tenemos a nuestro primer invitado. Hoy tenemos a Griffin, que ya todos han escuchado de Griff y sus patoaventuras. Bueno, lo que nos ha contado Angélica, por supuesto. Pero hoy vamos a escucharlo de su propia voz. Así es que todo este podcast, todo este episodio va a ser en inglés para que Griffin nos pueda contar todo acerca de su vida. Angélica, Griffin, this is your cue.
Primero que nada les queremos decir que va a haber unos cuantos capítulos donde nosotros vamos a tener a nuestros esposos y a lo mejor algunas personas dirán, ¿por qué los esposos? Bueno, primero que nada, el esposo de Graciel y el esposo de Paula, de Paula, ellos sí inmigraron, hicieron la migración de sus países natales a Europa y México, Ecuador y México. Entonces, pues es importante escuchar de ellos, pero también forman parte de nuestra historia y también creemos que, por ejemplo, Nono y Griffin tienen unas historias padrísimas a pesar de que no sean de migración. ¿Por qué? Porque ellos se casaron con personas que no son de su misma cultura, no son de su mismo lenguaje, pasamos experiencias diferentes, pero aún así es bueno saber su punto de vista y sus experiencias de ellos y también el punto de vista de ellos al casarse con nosotras que somos inmigrantes, ¿no?
Entonces triunfó el amor.
Triunfó el amor. Y no fue amor a toda vista, ¿eh?
No.
So, honey, thank you for being here.
Course. I'm happy to be here.
So we're gonna kind of dig into your story.
Alrighty.
I always say that you're like a cat that has like 9 different lives. Now you have a pretty incredible being born story or being created story. Would you like to kind of share that a little bit with us?
Sure.
I know it's kind of unconventional.
Yeah, so I like to joke and say I'm a test tube baby. But no, I have 2 moms. And so that was, the kind of the inception of the story, really. My parents wanted to have kids, but obviously because I had 2 moms, I couldn't do it, quote, naturally. So they went to a doctor, a fertility doctor in Tucson, and I was in a sperm bank from the University of Arizona. My biological mom, Renata, picked a sperm donor that, was an anonymous donor, but the physical traits kind of looked like her partner, Gail, my other mom. And then they got artificially inseminated. And Gail, here I am.
Gail, who we call Ima.
Yeah, Gail, Ima.
And what does Ima mean?
It's Hebrew for other mom, or mom in Hebrew.
Okay.
And so I call them Mom and Ima. That way you could differentiate the two.
So obviously when you're a baby, you don't have any knowledge of this.
Right.
But as you're growing up, when did you start realizing, okay, I have 2 moms? To us is normal now in this day and age, but at that time, your moms are not only lesbian, but they're also in a biracial, which we will have Renata on the podcast because she did immigrate from Germany to the United States, and she has a great story on her own. But can you kind of guide us? Can you touch on your experience with having 2 moms? Can you kind of talk to us about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's initially a hard question to answer because for me, it was normal. That's new, right? And so for me, I couldn't tell you like the earliest experience I had where I kind of realized, oh, this is a little bit different, but it would, because that's all I knew. But I think it really started to set in when, my parents when I noticed my parents being more involved in the LGBT community, going to like activist type meetings and things like that, and taking me along because obviously they had to. Can't leave me alone. And so that's kind of when I started realizing that it was different, you know, societally. I think at the time I didn't have the words, obviously, to describe it because I was a kid. You know, I think it really kind of hit home in middle school. That was really when people let me know that it was different. I think is the best way to put that. I was bullied quite a bit in middle school, like a lot, you know, to the point in fights every day. Probably should have been hospitalized at least once when I had my head slammed into a brick wall. And it was bad. It was to the point where I was making, you know, threats of physical harm and death to the students that were doing this to me because I couldn't sit anymore. Because every day I was getting beat up. And, you know, that took a lot and a lot of psychology. And thank God, I wish I knew who the child psychologist was that really gave me the tools to deal with that, because she probably saved my life, to be honest. And so, you know, gave me the tools to be confident in myself and realize that what other people think really doesn't matter at all. And to just be confident in who I know I am and who my family is, and let other people think the other way, and not give I think the biggest lesson was just not give the bully the reaction they want.
How that part of being bullied, of trying to get back at them, I know, like you just said, like you went to therapy and all that, but was it really that you were listening to your therapist in the way like, okay, so this is what she's telling me in a way, how I should react? Or it was more an inner work where you said like, yeah, makes total sense, and from now on, like there's no one coming at me? Or how did that
I think yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's a mix of both, right? I think the therapist, it's like any kind of therapy, doctor's appointment, anything, right? They give you the tools, the knowledge, but you have to be willing to take the medicine. A doctor can prescribe you all the medicine in the world to cure, fix whatever you're feeling, but if you don't take it, it don't matter. And so I think it was a mix of both. You know, I think at first, you know, and that's why I say it took a lot, because at first, you know, that's a very hard thing, especially for a 6th, 7th grader, you know, to really understand, especially in that moment that's so emotionally heated, and to the point where the school is saying, like, if he doesn't get this corrected, he's not going to be able to come back. I can't remember if there was a breakthrough moment or not, honestly. I couldn't tell you that, but it started to really click that, okay, when I don't react a certain way, what I get back to me is less. And then, you know, as I see that go on, it grew the confidence to keep reacting that way, which then helped solve the problem.
And I know that you were in a newspaper magazine, which if I find it, I can go ahead and link it. But I know that you were in a newspaper magazine. And I know as your wife, you and I did an interview once upon a time, and you were not the most comfortable with it.
Right.
How did that perception of comfortable versus uncomfortable grow for you? Or when were you like, okay, was it because of the bullying? Was it because you felt like you were putting up a show? What can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bullying definitely didn't help with that. I think it kind of helped push me into the shadows, right? Where I don't want to be seen, I don't want to be heard. Just let me do my thing, and that's kind of it. But, you know, I'll use the word forced, and I don't want to, you know, I think that has a negative connotation a lot of times, and I don't feel my parents meant anything negatively, you know, but I didn't have a choice to be at a lot of these activities, be it protests or parades or other kind of meetings or events or whatever it was. And I never really felt comfortable there. And so I can look back on it now. I think at the moment there was a feeling of discomfort, but it didn't go past that because it was still kind of normal for me too. You know, it was just part of our lives. Being in the book was just part of our lives, but I can look back at it and go, you know, I really wasn't the most comfortable with that, and really wish there were more conversations surrounding what those were, why we were there, and really wish I had a choice as to whether I wanted to be there or not. And, you know, I was a kid, so even if I had the choice, it may not have been, you know, allowed maybe we just didn't have babysitting, right? Like it could, there's some very practical reasons for that too, but I wish there were more of a conversation and more of an idea of consent behind that, because I really wasn't the most comfortable. I didn't feel like I fit in. And as the bullying grew and things like that expanded, being in that public eye also wasn't the most comfortable.
We're jumping to the future, but how did that affect your parenting now? Or looking back, how do you feel like that?
I think from a parenting standpoint now, I hope that it's providing more conversation around what we're doing, asking questions, especially to the kids about, is this what you want to do?
Not only have, lesbian mothers, but you also are in a biracial family. Her mom chose a sperm that looked like her partner, which is Caucasian.
Yep.
And then Gail chose a sperm donor that was, African-American to match Renata. But at this point, you're aware that your mothers are lesbian. Yep. You're aware that there's a race component to this. And you are going into college. You're a teenager. He's a band geek. He went into, you play the trumpet. You go and apply for college.
So I definitely had a very curated education because my mom had been a teacher in the district forever. I think it was about 1,000 years when she finally retired. Maybe not that long, like 30.
She's super young.
But she knew a lot and had a lot of influence. And then I had my teachers kind of highly picked and highly curated just to make sure I got a good education, and teachers that I knew my mom with educationally, which I can look back on and I really do appreciate, because I think from an education standpoint, I did get the best that I could with where I was. And so I definitely appreciate that. There were some events or clubs that I was kind of, I don't want to say pushed into, but kind of guided into, if you encouraged to join, like the African American Culture Club, to help connect to my roots, which I can look back on. And being African American was always kind of part of my story, but it was a part of the story that never felt right. You understand bad, but like I joined the African American Culture Club, and I was made sure to know that I didn't fit in. I was too light skinned to be there. It is because we're all pretty dark, and look at you. You don't belong. Why are you here? There was definitely a negative opinion towards that and towards me there, and so I was made to feel like I never fit in. And then even with certain other groups, I was kind of made to feel like I never fit in because I was too dark skinned also. So I was kind of in this weird limbo place, and that definitely, we joked that I was a band geek, but that was one place I fit in. Band, and that's where I fit in.
You start soccer, and then there's also something else that you just started doing when you're 12 years old.
Something.
Just a little something.
Flying airplanes too. I did both of those when I was 12.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry.
Yeah, I started flying when I was 12 through an organization called the Black Pilots of America, which was an organization. I found them at the Pima Air and Space Museum at an event, which is an airplane museum in Tucson. That's huge, actually. Mr. Morris was there. He was my flight instructor and the leader of the Southern Arizona chapter of the Black Pilots of America. And he was an African American man. If you go to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., at least last time I was there, his picture and his plaque were on the wall because he was the first African American pilot for Eastern Airlines, which was a regional airline on the East Coast. And so he had an awesome story, incredible man. And this group really did a lot for kids. Their focus was African American kids, but it was a great organization because they wore right on their sleeve, like just right out there in public, that it's not just for African American kids. Well, that's who we focus on, because in a lot of the communities they were in, that's definitely an underserved population, and still is. But they would take anyone really that wanted to learn how to fly an airplane. And so for the longest time, I was the only kid in the program here, and I think we paid like $75 for what was supposed to be an annual membership fee that we only paid once. And then the group paid for all my flight hours, so I flew airplane free once a month until I got my pilot's license. They paid for my testing, and it was an awesome experience. It got me hooked on flying, which sucks because it's a very expensive hobby.
Griffin only has expensive hobbies.
So you became a pilot? You became a pilot.
I had my pilot's license before I could drive alone. My mom dropped me off at the airport so I could go fly an airplane.
How old were you when you got your pilot license?
My student license allows me to solo when I was like 16 and 7 months. I think it was like right, I can't remember the regulations, but it was like right at the moment my age allowed me to solo an airplane alone. And then I got my full-blown pilot's license. I think I was 17 like, or 18 maybe. Again, it was right at the age, so pretty awesome. That's an amazing experience.
Your parents must be big. Griffin, what did your parents think about you became a pilot? Like,
they enjoyed that. They were definitely proud. I mean, that was a huge achievement. It took a lot of work and knowledge, and I think they could see that was probably one of the first things that they saw me really dive into, that I just latched onto. I think when I was 12, like when I got my flight kit, this little bag that had all that I still have in the garage, but it had like my pilot's logbook for me to log all my hours, and then a bunch of textbooks. And there's one textbook, it's like the aviation, I can't remember what it's called, but it's an aviation textbook, like your private pilot, that has all the knowledge in it that you're supposed to know as a pilot, from weather to avionics to aircraft dynamics and everything. It was like that thick. And I read it cover to cover, and I don't know how long. And so I think my parents could also tell how excited I was and how much I really enjoyed, because they're like, I've never seen him read like that before. And it was a textbook.
You were saying about how you started to play soccer and all that, and you had a much more interesting thing to say about flying planes at a young age. Don't you know that we're all about chismecito here? What's wrong with you?
It's me. I'll tell you guys anything, but you might have to ask in the right way, because just, I don't know, I don't like the limelight. I like focus outward and not on me so much.
And I think that's what makes you such a good leader, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. We're going back to, okay, you're starting to apply for college, and any young senior does in the US. Talk about that experience. Talk to us about that experience.
Yeah, college was a fun one, right? So I think, I applied to a bunch of colleges throughout the United States, Utah, Westminster, ultimately where I ended up. So I'm in California, Washington, Hawaii. And we went on a trip to, I can't remember what southern state it was, but we were looking at, I think it was Morehouse College, which is a historically Black college. And one of the reasons I liked it is they had some pretty good science programs. But again, similar to my experience in the African American Culture Club at my high school, I didn't really feel like I fit in. Yeah, and it's an all men's, African American college, and I didn't feel like I fit in. So that definitely changed my opinion on that school. Not to degrade the school by any means; it's a good school, but I just think with my past experience in that, that's definitely how I was made to feel, or how ultimately I chose Westminster College, where I got my bachelor's degree. And that's a whole fun story, because I chose that school because of their aviation program. At the time, they had a bachelor's degree in aviation, where you get all the rest of your pilot's licenses and hours needed to go on with a career as a pilot. And at the time, that's something I really, really wanted to do. Then somewhere in between my, ending high school senior year and starting college, I talked myself out of being a pilot for a living, which kind of kicked myself in the ass for a lot.
He does.
I do. Because the road to becoming a professional pilot is paved with poverty. In all reality, in the United States, it's to become a professional pilot, you have to spend a long time eating nothing but top ramen and living on people's couches, because you're trying to build hours. You spend $100,000 trying to get licenses, and then you still have to build so much experience and hours flying before any organization will look at you as a professional, and you're paying for that. And the cheapest rate I've ever found was $100 an hour for an airplane. And if you're trying to gain 1,500 hours, most of the airplanes you need to fly are probably closer to $500, $600, $700, $800 an hour to fly before you buy gas. That's $5 a gallon, if you're lucky. And so it's just a very expensive. It takes a lot to get to the point where you can fly professionally and be the pilot that, that quote rich pilot or whatever that people always talk about when they think of pilots.
I shared a little bit when it was my time for my story. Sorry.
Good.
I shared a little bit about how when I came to the United States, I had such a culture shock because one of the things that I saw was at my school, it was all girls, Catholic school. We were talking about who had the most expensive backpack and who went on the craziest vacation. And then I see that in the United States, a lot of people are more sexually active. And I feel like based on what you and I have talked to, your childhood was very well protected. I feel like you remained, I guess, for lack of a better word, innocent for a long time.
One, I was taught no sex until marriage, and they had that for quite a while. Where my parents got that, I don't know, because usually that's something that comes from religion, which we didn't have, but it's also not a bad lesson overall. But I had that in my head, as well as I think I was busy. I wasn't the normal kid. I lived in a pretty decent neighborhood, but drugs were around. But I was also a pilot at the time. So, the FAA could pull me off the ramp at the airport at any point and say, hey, let's go take a drug test. Right. And then my parents just were scary. So, from that aspect, there was definitely a strong parental influence of do the right thing. But I was also a very busy kid especially in high school, with marching band, with soccer, playing. I kind of stopped playing soccer in high school and really focused on officiating, refereeing. But I was busy. I just think my parents kept me busy because for the longest time I was even in two sports. They kept me busy, which kept me out of trouble also, in a lot of ways. But I think that on the flip side of that same busyness also kept me from experiencing certain things that kids experience as they grow up, through puberty and develop. And so when you talk about fumbling into sexual experiences, like I was not confident with women. I think with, myself is really what that was. Right. And I didn't know how to approach to, initiate relationships or really just, much conversation. So yeah, a lot of that I did kind of fumble into on accident or unknowingly. And it's just what it was.
So you gone to college, and at some point you decide to go to ROTC or the Army. Can you kind of explain the difference between the two? Because I know that there's just enlisting and then going into ROTC. And then how did your parents take it, and how did that change your relationship?
Yeah. So first, talking just kind of structure of the military, I think it's the easiest way to start this conversation. And in the U.S. military, there's two there's all the branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, et cetera, et cetera. Within each branch, there's the enlisted, there's warrant officers, and then there's officers. The officers are the ones in charge of like organizations or different sections. And there's a couple different ways to become an officer. One's ROTC, which Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is basically a college course that's offered at the major state universities. And at some point you can decide if you want to just take that course as kind of a leadership fun thing, or actually enter the military, sign a contract, and enter the military that way. And once you go through the course of training, you commission as a lieutenant. So I enrolled in nursing school, which led me to ROTC. Again, military was always something that I've had on my mind. That idea of serving, always something I enjoyed. And so the Army and the Air Force ROTC programs, and the Navy, they had an event, some kind of recruiting event at my college. And I was chatting with both the Army and the Air Force, and they both did nursing school scholarships specifically. Like the ROTC scholarship program is very, very competitive. Very competitive because it's such a good scholarship for schools. Like they paid for all my school plus a month of my books, all my tuition, my room and board, the college threw in for free. Plus I got a monthly stipend that was tax-free just for me. So it's a very, very competitive program. And so both the Air Force and the Army had scholarships specific for nursing school. The Air Force wouldn't give me any scholarship money until I was actually in that program. And I went to a private liberal arts college, and so that was very expensive. But the Army was willing to give me money immediately. So ultimately, my choice in Army versus Air Force was purely money. is what that was, getting the scholarship the fastest. And so that's what I did.
And I want to make it clear that when Griffin and I got married, he was already in the military. He had deployed. He was taking courses to become, he was in his way to become a police officer, which we'll talk in a little bit more. But I was so proud of him. And I said to him, like, I will support you 1,000,000,000% on whatever decision you want in life. So it never, I feel like a lot of people jokingly say, oh, you probably talked him out of being a police officer. And I would never. Like, I know who I married. Every decision that Griffin has made since we got married was on his own. I know I'm Hispanic, but I'm not Hispanic on that sense.
It's true that you married me in the uniform.
Yeah.
Right. That's how you've always known me, and I know where my passions have always been. And so that was, a part of the life I know you accepted.
How did your decision to join the military, how was that received by your family?
When you ask my parents, they would tell you that they always knew I would join the military. Like, it wasn't a matter of if, but
They
when.
do say that.
They do. Right? And so I think they've always known it was there and have supported me. But their version of support was pushing me to go into the military because they knew it was going to happen, but go into it they considered the right way, right? Go in through ROTC as an officer. They just kind of made the best of the situation. They probably weren't too crazy about.
And how did you meet each other? I'm sorry
A lot of different times.
So that is something funny because we actually met
a lot of times
before we actually met.
I love it right now.
Okay.
It works with the story in some ways because we met when I was in college and she was in high school, but didn't realize it yet. She worked at the Training Table, which was a burger restaurant about 2 minutes away from my school, my college.
Your dorm.
My dorm, yeah. And I'd go there and eat and study and do that stuff. And so she worked there. And so we interacted there and had no idea. At one point, too, my dorm room was the showroom for the college. So whenever they did campus tours, and when they were showing people the upperclassmen dorms, they would actually take them into my dorm room, which is, my dorm room was set up like an apartment. So as you walk in, there's a kitchen and like a living area. And then on each side, there were 3 bedrooms. And so ours was the showroom. And lo and behold, someone here took a tour, was in my dorm room.
I didn't know. I wasn't stalking him.
Right.
I just took the tour of the school and the dorm. And then years passed and we talked about it. And he said, wait a second.
Right? Well, that was the other thing is in college, I worked in sports medicine. I was one of the athletic training assistants. So I was one of those guys on the sidelines with the little fanny pack, in case someone got hurt or anything like that. But one of the teams I took care of was our women's soccer team. And one of her best friends at the time was on the women's soccer team. And so she'd go to the games. And so we'd pass each other and interact there as well.
I was at most Westminster soccer girl soccer games. So he was there and I was there and we didn't know each other. And we went to a party together.
Yeah.
We not together, but we went to the same
the
party
same place, yeah.
next door to my house. Well, he was a security officer.
Oh, yeah.
You want to go?
Yeah.
I
I was a security officer. And, when she worked at Abercrombie, late at night, I would walk her to her car. So,
and that we can verify because we actually went back and looked at logs where it shows that he walked me to my car multiple times.
yeah.
So, but we didn't talk or anything. We were just,
Yeah.
I was a preppy Abercrombie girl and he was just the cop.
Right. It's true. So we met a lot of
Yeah.
until we actually met.
Why do you decide became a police officer? Because you say you were in the military, right? And then what makes you feel like, okay, I want to be a police officer?
So in college, I was in nursing school, did sports medicine. While I was in nursing school, I worked in the burn trauma ICU at the hospital. I was a tech there. Loved that job. That was one of my 2 favorite jobs. Through my schooling, I had some experiences, decided nursing wasn't for me, and actually transitioned out of the nursing program into a bachelor's of health science. And at that time, I was still working in the burn unit. Once I graduated college, I commissioned in, because I wasn't in nursing school anymore, I couldn't go into to the Army as a nurse. So I did military police, open to the military version of policing, in that job role there. But then once I left college, I was like, I need to kind of start doing something better with my life. And I was a security guard. And then as I grew in the ranks in the security world there, ultimately, I kind of always wanted to be a cop, and interacted with the police officers working at the mall. I deployed. And then when I came back, went back to the mall, but at the same time was applying to different police departments because that was just always kind of that next logical career step from security to law enforcement. And so that's when I became a police officer. It was right after my first deployment.
9 lives.
Yeah.
So, nurse, police officer, pilot, what else?
Soccer referee.
Well, are you willing to talk about what happened
In what?
in nursing school? Why you were not able to commission in nursing school?
Yeah. I think so. The reason I left nursing school, it was during my OB rotation, my obstetrics rotation at the hospital. There was an experience where there was a C-section that I was watching that went horrifically wrong. And no fault of the doctors. The doctors knew that it was going to be a complicated surgery because of just the health conditions this woman had. But they didn't realize how bad it actually would be. And so this lady ended up bleeding a lot, hemorrhaging a lot. And so I took the role of running blood between the blood bank at the hospital and the operating room. They all survived and from what I understand were healthy and happy. But immediately after that, once she stabilized, I kind of took a break in one of the patient rooms. There was no patient there, but I just kind of stepped back and took a break because that was exhausting work. And an intern physician, so fresh out of medical school, came up to me and got in my face and told me I needed to stop enjoying this, that this lady's family was there, and that it was inappropriate for me to be enjoying this as much as I did. So I told him to fuck off and that I wasn't enjoying it and I was doing my job. And so obviously that wasn't very well received. And I can look back on that and realize that I will always stand by the message I was trying to send, but not how I said it, and probably shouldn't have come from me. There was a better way to handle that situation. He later apologized, which I also didn't really accept as much because he was like, this is the first time I've seen someone dying. And I was like, well, it's not mine. And so my school obviously failed me in that class, which they had the right to. I did have the option to rejoin the next nursing school cohort and continue with my education in nursing school, but I kind of did a knee-jerk reaction and said, no, I'll transfer out.
So right around this time, you're working at the burn unit, you're going to school, switching degrees, you work in the burn unit. You are also in a very unstable relationship.
Yes.
I know that there is a lot of taboo about domestic violence and being domestic violence only towards women. Can you talk to us about your experience and how this affected your life? Do you think that fight had anything to do with what you were experiencing at home, or was that not at the same time?
That wasn't at the same time. But yeah, after, later I was definitely in an unstable relationship, subject to domestic violence, was the victim of domestic violence, but, being a man in our society, definitely not encouraged to speak up about, that and other issues, sexually. It was sexual assault and things like that, where being a male in our society, we're not expected to stand up and say, I'm a victim of this has happened to me, which I think has affected me in ways that I probably still don't know yet.
And this is somebody who worked with you at the hospital, right? It was somebody you not only saw at home, but you also saw her at work. And did you feel at that point that you were a victim of domestic violence and sexual abuse?
No, at the moment, no. I think, and I don't know why. I think I didn't know how to do relationships then, and probably didn't have, because, we talked about my past and stumbling into sexual relationships and things like that, where I probably didn't have the best idea of what a relationship actually should be and what. And so at the time, no, I definitely didn't feel that way. Didn't feel right by any means.
You thought that it just was normal?
I don't know if I'd say normal, because I didn't see fights growing up.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like, it felt like it was something I just needed to endure, and that if I could endure it, would get better.
So you get out of that relationship that is kind of around the time you and I met. And then we got engaged September, come back in December, got married February. So everything was very quick. How was your first deployment?
It was interesting. I mean, I deployed to Guantanamo Bay, and I had originally volunteered to go to Afghanistan in a combat unit. The Army switched me and sent me to Guantanamo Bay. But my first deployment was interesting. It was hard because I was isolated. We were dating.
I didn't know we were dating. He knew we were dating. I didn't know we were dating.
Right. And so, but I also did things that if you're dating someone, you shouldn't be doing, and communicating with other people and whatnot. And so it was, definitely not appropriate, but also I think part of the culture I was in. And that was just kind of being an asshole too. Like I can't put it a better way than that.
And we've talked about that. I didn't know you were going to bring that up, but we talked in our therapy and everything about it. You didn't know it was going to hurt me because you never thought I was going to find out what you were doing. But it was almost like, this is my time to do whatever the fuck I want.
Right.
So I'm going to do it. Is that, is that correct?
I think so. I think at the time it probably wasn't as conscious as that, but yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put what I was doing. Yeah.
So anyway, we almost canceled the wedding. Then after we got married, I don't know if you guys knew this, but I continued to learn a few things that happened. Either he continued to have conversations with this girl or things that I found out. And I filed for divorce a month after we got married. And I'll let you take it from me.
Okay.
What?
And so we weren't in a good place. I mean, my actions definitely put us in a bad spot.
I was so depressed, you guys. I was running red lights on purpose to see if a car would hit me. Like, I never in my life have been that depressed until recently, but it was a tough time for me because also I internalized a lot of things. I'm sorry, I internalized a lot of things. So I wasn't communicating with my mom, and my mom was very much on your side because she would only see me being upset. And poor Griffin, right? And that's been kind of like the theme of our relationship. Angelica is such an asshole and Griffin is such an angel. And then it was like,
I'm sorry. But why did your mom took that side, I don't get it.
I am not the kind of person that shares her problems when they're happening. So my mom had no idea what was happening between Griffin and I. So she was seeing this man that loves his her daughter. She was seeing this man who was like, career oriented in the army and everything. And then I am just upset at him. So I never communicated with my mom until after what happened. So I think that was the reason when she was like, what's going on with you? He's great. And then it took me a long time in therapy for me to be able to communicate what was happening. I for a long time I was very sheltered, and my mom would get so frustrated because she was like, oh my gosh, why are you telling me this 3 months, 10 months, 3 years after it happened instead of when
I think definitely has worked because now you're telling this to everyone.
I mean, yeah, I didn't know he was going to bring that up. So.
It's part of our story.
Yeah. On September, I can't remember. It was like you guys were apart for like lots of months, a few months. And how do you guys communicate? Like, do you like talk every day by phone or email or chatting? How you guys kept that love or that interest in?
A lot. No, that first deployment, so the first time I was there, cell phones didn't work, but it was internet-based communication. So chats, Facebook Messenger, Skype calls, Zoom, Skype. Yeah, it was Skype at the time. That kind of, those kind of conversations. So really however we could.
So we get past that like rough time. You do become a police officer.
Yep.
We decide to have a child. We're kind of speeding some of that story because it was very rough. My biggest takeaway of that time would be like therapy. And communication. Obviously, if you're in like a situation where your life is at risk or something like that, we're not gonna support that or anything like that, but we do it based on our experiences and our love that we had for each other, which is therapy and communication. And then we had a daughter, and you were still a police officer. And then this is the time where Black Lives Matter kind of started. This is also the time where a lot of political division happened. And this is also the time where we lost a few police officers in our own city. And I remember as a wife going to bed with the radio, the police radio, just to make sure that I could hear his voice before we went to bed, because I could not communicate with him super easily. So there were times that he was in domestic violence calls or high risk calls. I knew I couldn't just like text him and say, hey, 10-4, 10-4 in the police world means like check in. And I couldn't do that. So I knew that my only way to have peace was to listen to the radio. And there were multiple times that I fell asleep with the radio on because I just could not get a hold of him. I couldn't find him. And it was traumatizing as a wife. I remember vividly, there was one time where I couldn't get a hold of you. And I couldn't get a hold of you for a while. And sorry, this story makes me cry. And without me knowing, there was a situation going on, like a couple of streets down, and the sirens started getting closer and closer, and the police sirens started getting, and I had Paulette. I think Paulette was already asleep because you were working graves.
Yeah.
And I remember I got out of my PJs and I put like regular clothes on, and I just waited by the door because I knew that there was going to be a police car pulling in to tell me that like Griffin got in an accident or Griffin is no longer with us. So I love, and I will always support you being anything you want. Like, I hope you know that. But that was really hard as a wife. And I feel like it's hard for me to see all the hate for police officers when I have been the person on the other side waiting to hear my husband's husband's voice just to know he's still alive.
It's
your perspective about police.
It's a very hard life. It's a job I love. Graz, this kind of brings me back to your question a long time ago about which kind of jobs I've enjoyed the most. And currently, to wrap that up, work in healthcare administration, currently, but I've done healthcare administration, and I despise the business of healthcare now. But I would say my two favorite jobs that are right.
Griffin is very passionate.
Right at the top of my jobs were both police officer and when I was a tech on the burn unit in the burn ICU. But I can't distinguish one over the other. They were the best jobs I've ever had. I wish every day I could be a police officer again. I loved it so much. It was a fucking fantastic job. But I would also never relapse. And I use the word relapse on purpose. And that's what I always tell people is that it's a drug. It's an addicting lifestyle. It's a destructive lifestyle, which is why it's a drug, because for this reason, right? It's terrible on families. And when you're the officer, it's terrible for your mental health.
When we were in Mexico, we actually talked to Paulina and my cousins about this, because the very first week of Griffin becoming a police officer, what is one thing that they do? They give you?
We got the packet for my living will to fill out, like, if you died, what are your wishes? And then they also take your official portrait, which is also your funeral portrait. So
the very first week of your job as a police officer is like, okay, well, this is your package for you to go at home and discuss with your wife. What type of funeral do you want? Do you want to be cremated? Who do you want to be your, carry your casket? Do you want a traditional police? The coffin. Do you want a traditional funeral? Are you in the military? what parts of the military do you want to
Mhm.
blend into your funeral. So you walk in already talking about the day you die. So
It's an eye-opening
Wow.
lifestyle
Oh.
that
and it changes.
Ay, qué feo eso de la foto.
Ya sí. Tú te traumaste con eso.
there are also on the flip side of that moments where we'll be chatting on the phone. I'm having a boring day and just driving around in my car, and we're chatting on the phone. And next thing you know, she hears the 3 beeps of seriousness. Whenever a serious call comes over the radio, they always start it with beep, 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 because it's just a tone to get you to, drop whatever you're doing and pay attention. And so she'll hear the tones and then hear my number, and then all of a sudden be like, all right, honey, I got to go by, and just hang up the phone, or like she'll hear a siren click on in the background, and then she won't hear from me for hours. And she already knows, because of her experience in the world, that he's going to something serious, and now I can't talk to him.
Okay, so have you ever lived an experience where you were really afraid or scared about you or your family while being a police officer?
Yes. Not so much my family. Thankfully, we lived in Salt Lake, which is a pretty safe city overall. And so I did have an experience where that did make me fear for my life, where I did end up almost taking someone else's life. And that sticks with me to this day. And I thank God I didn't pull the trigger. Although, for whatever it's worth, probably would have been legally justified. I thank God every day the situation turned out the way it did, and that young man is still alive.
Along with that question, I know that a lot of people ask you, what is the worst thing that you've seen or heard as a police officer? And I know that you always give surface level surface level answers. How come?
Because people should not know the horror that other people can cause to each other. I've seen the horror other people can do to other people. And I feel people that ask that question ask it in the sense of like death and what they see on TV, and how Hollywood popularizes human tragedy, but people don't actually want to know the horrific things that we can do to each other. And so I choose not to answer that question, because there are traumas that still stick with me to this day and still come back to me to this day.
Can you touch on your views of leadership and how you have molded your relationship?
Talking about what forms my leadership style has been a lot of the leaders I've had in the past that either haven't served me or have. And I think of one leader specifically who, Kevin Thacker, my old police chief, who is amazing soul, amazing man, who I would follow into hell with a squirt gun. And I've had other leaders that couldn't lead themselves out of a paper bag. But I've taken kind of all those experiences and formed my own kind of version of, what in the academic world calls servant leadership, where, I'm here to serve you as your leader. I'm here to serve my team. But I really, the love for my teams, it's something you learned in the military, is you have to love the people around you, and you have to love the people you lead in a very weird way, because the next order I could give them could lead them to their death. But you have to love your team and know your teams. And so I think that's the one lesson from military leadership I take into any leadership role I have, is that I do love and care for the people that I'm in charge of. And I am here to serve them and help them develop. Right. My best stories as a leader have been when people come back to me years later and say, hey, you taught me this lesson that sticks with me now, 5 or 6 years after we haven't even worked together. And so really, as a leader, if I can help you develop and meet your goals as my team members, we all get better. It's not about me.
I have a story of when we built a house and we were doing our walkthrough with superintendent, and the superintendent came. We started talking. I think you were at a military training or something. And we started talking about who my husband was, this and that. He was also in the army. And he goes, hold on. Your husband is Captain Franz? Oh my gosh. We all want to be in his unit because he's such a good leader. And I wanted to like scream from the top of my head, like, yep, that's my husband. So I've been able to see your growth also as a leader, and I really am impressed. What is one piece of advice that you would give people in leadership roles?
Be authentically you. I think that's the biggest thing. It's hard to give just one piece of advice, right? I could talk forever on this, but if I could boil it down.
But Paulina wants to go to
I know
sleep.
she does. Be authentically you. You know, as a leader, you have to be yourself. You have to be authentic. And if you're not being authentic and trying to put on some persona, people see right through that bullshit and your credibility is gone as a leader. So be authentically you and honest. If you tell your team you're going to do something, you better damn well do it. But also care for the people that are in your care. If you're a leader and you don't actually care for the people, it ain't going to work. You know, metrics and everything else will follow. Business metrics, finances, EBITDA, all this business shit that we track on spreadsheets as leaders will follow if you can care for the people. And I think a lot of, especially in business, we forget that because we're so driven towards metrics and we're so driven towards finances and we're so driven towards things like, how do I measure this? Which is important in business. If you can't measure it, you can't measure your goal, you can't attain it, right? Like that's insanely important in business. That stuff will be taken care of if you take care of the people that are supposed to take care of it, right? My teams will always perform better if I can take care of them as people. Once they're safe as people, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The very bottom of the triangle. Once you're safe as a person, the rest will follow. And I can get a fully actualized team right here on the top if you're okay.
One book that you would recommend, because he reads a lot, so.
Oh, geez.
We have a whole library, so.
I think, you know, from a leadership standpoint, Stephen Covey book, Trust and Inspire, I think is a really good leadership book that just talks about, you know, you can give trust in one of a couple ways, right? You can have your team earn your trust, or you can, you know, or you earn your, you know, the trust of your teammates or vice versa, or it can be given, right? Do you just give trust and know that sometimes by giving trust, you're going to get burned or taken advantage of, et cetera, et cetera. I feel that's a better way to lead and to live is by automatically giving trust. We're all people. I trust you. That may mean at some point you're going to burn me, but you know what? We start at an authentic place. So I think that's a great book. And really any book by Brene Brown, I think is great because her just kind of authentic style of communicating with people, I think I really draw to in my leadership styles.
So with you being in the military,
Mm-hmm.
and now you've married somebody who is an immigrant, worked one of your deployments, and I don't think we mentioned it, was Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, where they house the alleged terrorist of 9/11, correct? I just want to know, what is the comparison in your mind of Gitmo versus the illegal immigrants detainees? And what is your perception of illegal immigrants now that you're married to somebody who immigrated into this country? Because a lot of people think immigrants are terrorists that are trying to come into this country to do all these bad things, right? Like we heard it during Trump administration.
I don't feel there is any comparison between a terrorist or someone trying to do harm and an immigrant. There's absolutely no, like the people that I dealt with in Guantanamo Bay would, if I unlocked the door at the right moment, would happily kill me with a smile on my face. It's just that simple. And so they don't, you know, there's absolutely no comparison. People, for the most part, the people that are, you know, immigrating illegally to the United States want a better life. It might have to do that in a way that makes them a quote criminal, either because it was done, you know, illegally or through because they were trafficked or were used to traffic something. Like it's a whole gamut of things, but they want a better life. You know, why would you risk your life otherwise? And so there's absolutely no comparison. People are just trying to do better for themselves and their family. Anyone that makes that comparison, I think, is holistically wrong.
How do you think your military values conflict with immigration issues and you being married to an immigrant? Military
values, first thing I say is, you know, I swore to protect and defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so when you know, I don't feel illegal immigration is an enemy. And yet you have the National Guard on the borders, and there's a lot of reasons for that that have almost nothing to do with immigration. To be all, in total honesty, it's all about finances and money. I think my military value is ultimately, again, love the people around you, right? That's what I learned in the military. You love the people around you, and I think that should dictate how, or it does dictate how, my values towards illegal immigrants and immigrants and people in general, right? We love the people around us, love our communities. And if we can take care of our communities, again, everything seems to work better.
You grew up in Tucson, which is heavily influenced by Mexican culture. How do you think, did you ever see somebody that crossed the border? And how do you think that influenced your perception of people coming into this country?
I also did an internship in an emergency room that dealt with a lot of people that were flown in by the Border Patrol and taken in from ambulances who were on the verge of death from trying to make that trek, because the southern Arizona desert is a death trap. It's horrific. It's treacherous. It's not safe. And so I've seen people on the verge of death risking their lives or their kids' lives just trying to do something better. And so I think that experience brought it out of the news for me and really showed me the humanity behind it all. And the people that are just trying to do something better for themselves, but we've created an impossible system.
What would be your answer to illegal immigration?
That's a two-part answer. First is to secure the borders. And I think seriously, right? You have to secure the border, and you have to do that for a variety of reasons. One, because it's just safe. It's safe for us because we know bad things do come across any border. And if you go to other places, borders are secure throughout the world. It's a crazy thought, right? Like that. And so build the damn wall. Who cares, right? Especially in the southern Arizona desert. If building a wall or doing something like that keeps one person from baking to death in the heat of the desert, isn't that worth it?
So let me pause you right here. So you are okay with people coming to the United States for a better life.
Absolutely.
But you're not okay with the risk or the danger that it puts people's life in. Because I don't want it to be perceived as like, oh my gosh, he just talked about all this thing, but now he's saying build a wall. Like build a wall to save life.
So it deters someone from crossing a desert and they live. Great, we saved a life, right? Like it's a human being, they're alive. But that's why I say it's a two-part answer, right? Because securing the border can't be the only answer, because that's a political talking point that doesn't actually mean anything. The second part of the answer needs to be fixing our immigration system so legal immigration is actually attainable for a normal person. I mean, watching you go through the process, it's incredibly cost prohibitive. It takes forever, and it's not truly attainable by a normal person. It isn't. And so I think the second part of this answer is to make that system attainable for a normal person. Look at DACA and say, let's make DACA a real thing, and let's give the path to citizenship to those that are on DACA. Because then once those kiddos that had no choice but to come here, they're now citizens if they meet XYZ requirements, which shouldn't be too overly burdensome, but at the same time should vet people appropriately. But then they can request their parents, right, who are probably here illegally, because that's why they're on DACA, right? But then they can legally request their parents, so there's a path to citizenship for them.
We've talked about it. I feel like DACA was a way to cover the sun with one finger.
Me, in my situation, I came to the States I just think that I when I came to the States, I did everything like it's supposed to be, okay, I met a Brennan, and then I sent my papers to immigration, and I got the work permit after like a year of Social Security, but I pay a lot of money for do that. Yeah, and I'm not a citizen yet. I only have like a green card day. Even though that I have a green card, my green card, I got a temporary green card, which is only 2 years. And I submit other paperwork that I needed for the permanent resident, which be the green card itself, right? That lasts like 10 years, I believe. And then but then you can become a citizen after like 5 years. But anyway, after that, I got my temporal green card, and it will expire in 22. And now after that was on my other paperwork to get the permanent one, and I don't have it yet because it's in process, and it's been like almost 2 years. So the only thing that makes me being legal here, it's a piece of paper saying that it's in process. Basically, the piece of paper is from immigration. But I just don't understand why it's taking so long, because I work, I have a job, I have a daughter here, I've been here almost 5 years, and I still don't have that. So I just think it's a little, I pay taxes too. So I just think sometimes it's just, I don't know. I just feel like for us that we've been doing this for a long time, I hope that it can get faster to get this. But I don't know why it's taking so long. It's because.
And now I am a citizen, but I have a paper that says that I'm a citizen. And if for any reason that paper gets damaged or we lose it or anything like that, it's a $500 fee to reprint that paper. So we've already gone through the hoops, the loops, the payments, the lives, the everything. And then it's like, okay, you're a citizen, but if you lose it, you still have a but. A lot of people think that you just walk into an office and say, hey, my name is Angelica. I would like to be a US citizen. And the government says, hey, we've been waiting for you. Here's your paperwork. And it really, truly isn't how it is.
Right?
Yeah. It's crazy.
Bueno, a todos, muchas gracias por escucharnos en este episodio. Hemos conocido a Griffin, el esposo de Angélica. Thank you so much, Griffin, to join us. It was a very interesting story. Thank you for telling us about your story, how you met Angelica. It was a beautiful love story, and it was so exciting to know about your background. Y en serio, a todos, de nuevo, gracias y espero que tengan una linda semana. No se olviden que pueden escuchar nuestro episodio en todas las plataformas como Spotify, YouTube y iHeart. Okay. Gracias. Nos vemos pronto. Bye. Griff para presidente.